guidance in our deliberations on behalf of the people of the Colac Otway Shire. Enable this council's decisions to be those that contribute to the true welfare and betterment of our community. I note that all councillors are present, therefore there are no apologies. I would like to start this afternoon by acknowledging the traditional custodians and lawmakers of this land, their elders past and present, and welcome any descendants here today. I would like to advise that all planning committee meetings are audio recorded and live streamed with the exception of confidential matters. This includes the public participation sections of meetings. The live stream recording of this afternoon's meeting will be placed on the website as soon as practical. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Okay, now we move to item 6.1. The purpose of this report is to consider planning permission for the temporary use of the land at 185 and 265 Telegraph Road, Maroon, as a place of assembly, a music festival to be known as Pennyroyal Plains, with ancillary temporary camping, associated works and the installation of ancillary amenities and structures. It is also proposed to create temporary access to a road in a Transport Zone 2. Do councillors have any questions of officers? Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Mayor. I did ask this question privately, but I would like the community to hear it. We've heard from the applicant in relation to payment of compensation to farmers should they suffer some stock loss or their stock loses condition, which is an enormous fear of the farming community, given that a week or so later is a major store sale. Is there anything in writing from the applicant in relation to appropriate and reasonable compensation, or do we anticipate anything in writing, or how do we ensure that that offer made by the applicant in a submissions hearing will be enforced?
Through you, Mayor. We do believe that the applicant has had some discussions with neighbouring landowners about the potential for there to be compensation if there was to be adverse impacts as a result of the concert if it was to proceed. That kind of arrangement is something that would sit outside of any planning permit that's issued. It's sort of separate to the planning issues that you're considering today, but it is a genuine offer that has been made, in our view, from the applicant's perspective, and it would be something that would be an agreement that would need to be reached between those neighbours and the proponent between now and the commencement of the concert should it proceed. But we do believe that that was a genuine intent, and it would just be subject to further negotiations occurring between the parties. But it's not something that council can control or manage through this permit process. Sorry, I should just add, I suppose, from an officer perspective, we've put forward a set of conditions in the recommendation that we believe would satisfactorily mitigate the impacts of the concert so that you could be confident in making a decision to support it subject to those conditions and managing the concert in a way that doesn't result in such an adverse impact.
Did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, if I may, thank you. Thanks, Councillor Hart. Just in relation to that, and I understand it's outside your scope, so to speak, in relation to compensation, but I guess as a sign of goodwill, if a permit is approved, would officers just try and keep an eye on that and continue to work with the community to see if there's an outcome in that area?
Through you, Mayor, we wouldn't have any formal role in that. I think we would expect that that's primarily a discussion to occur directly between the two parties, but certainly happy to answer questions from the community or in any way assist, but I think it is primarily a conversation between the parties.
Councillor Hart.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I have just flagging that I have several questions. But this particular one follows on what Councillor Potter was talking about. And Mr McNeil may have answered it, but he said something like, we have no formal role. Am I to take it that the planning permit will have no reference whatsoever to some sort of expectation that compensation is available, no reference to a process, no reference to it at all. If that's incorrect, could you please point out which condition or note refers to the expectation that such compensation arrangements are available?
Through you, Mayor, the answer to that question is that there isn't any reference in the permit conditions to any compensation of landowners, but there is conditions recommended in the recommendation that do require monitoring of animals for the duration of the first event in terms of understanding what impacts there might be.
And just to be clear, are you also saying there's no reference to the notes? Because planning permits such as these have various notes which aren't conditions. So I just want to be absolutely clear, there's no reference to a compensation arrangement in condition, notes or any other part of the planning permit. Is that a correct understanding?
Through you, Mayor, there's no mention in the notes either. The notes deal specifically with planning-related matters, and the issue of compensation lies outside the planning system, basically.
Councillor Bell.
Thanks, Mayor. Obviously, with an event like this, there is a perceived and no doubt an actual economic benefit for the broader community and region. The applicant has provided some details around this. I'm just wondering if you have undertaken any research independent from the applicant's information to understand what that economic benefit might be and what that entailed. What sort of investigation did that entail?
Through you, Mayor, no, we haven't done specific research, and obviously it's a little bit difficult as well when the event hasn't even taken place. Obviously, as an ongoing situation, I would expect if a permit was issued, our economic development unit would be looking closely at the benefits that accrued from the event. We do have details from the Lorne event and took that into account as an event that has actually occurred, and that gives us some information. So in summary, no, we haven't specifically done it, but we would be looking at obviously the economic flow on should the event get a permit. Our economic development unit would.
Councillor Bell.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks for that response. Just an extension to that. My understanding is that Council has, in their recommendation, have considered the likely impacts to the economy within the community and the region. When determining that, how is it that you've made a decision around that when you don't have the information as you've just discussed? And are you basing it almost entirely on the assumptions out of the previous festivals arrangement in another shire?
Through you, Mayor, we're actually, I would argue, in a fortunate position that we do have some background information. Quite often events would come to a locality with no background information available. This is a long-established festival. They've obviously worked closely with the Lorne community, and the feedback we have, obviously, we've looked at quite closely. So with the available information, we're satisfied that there's more information than usually would be available to Council about potential economic onflow from an event.
Are there any further questions? Oh, I'll go Councillor Costa and then Councillor Hart.
Thank you, Mayor. In the table to clause 7303, the definition of place of assembly, it doesn't include music festival in the definition that I can see. So on what basis are we proposing to issue a permit for a place of assembly for a music festival? Where does that come from?
Through you, Mayor, obviously place of assembly doesn't list every single type of place of assembly that occurs. It doesn't describe every individual event. There is numerous examples of events that have occurred that have been classed as places of assembly based on the congregation of people for entertainment, for cultural events, etc. So the wider definition of place of assembly basically covers this event.
Thank you. Follow on if I can. So places of assembly, just looking at the definition which covers carnivals, cinemas, cinema-based entertainment facility, halls, nightclubs sort of thing. That's what's listed under place of assembly. But these things that are defined are specifically prohibited within the farm zone, if I understand correctly.
The provisions of the farming zone basically say that a place of assembly is a Section 2 use for which a permit can be sought and for which a permit can be issued, unless they're the types of place of assembly that you specifically mentioned, like nightclubs, carnivals, circuses. Those are prohibited, others aren't within the farming zone.
Councillor Hart.
The agenda talks about whether or not livestock might be adversely affected by noise, and says, in effect, that there's not good studies or not good information on this, and I'm happy for you to criticise that if that's not right. So whose onus does it fall on to demonstrate that the livestock may be adversely affected? Is it the onus of the local farmers to prove that, or is it the onus of the applicant to prove that it won't be an issue?
Through you, Mayor, it's an interesting question because obviously without the research there, neither position, if you like, can be demonstrated until the event actually takes place. As part of the assessment process, we went to Agriculture Victoria and we looked around to see whether we could obtain any information in terms of the potential for impact. That included looking at VCAT decisions where tribunal members turned their minds to it but said that there was no evidence in front of them that demonstrated the impact. So it's a little bit of a conundrum, if you like, given that the research doesn't exist that demonstrates categorically one way or the other, and that's one of the reasons that we've actually recommended a slightly unusual condition, requiring animal monitoring to actually occur on property surrounding the site of the event whilst the event is taking place, so that we can actually establish some evidence one way or the other in the event a permit is issued.
Thanks for the answer on that one. On condition 9, assuming the, not note 9, but condition 9, it talks about the need for a traffic management plan. Do I take it from the fact that that's needed, that council does not currently have a traffic management plan to its satisfaction?
We do have information on traffic generation and a traffic impact assessment, but as part of any event like this, you require more detailed information that actually controls the event when it's actually operating. You'll see similarly the Department of Transport didn't actually object to the proposal, but they do require an annual, if the event continues each year, an annual traffic management plan to be provided for approval. So it's a pretty standard requirement that you assess the information that's in, check that it actually works, and then get the really detailed information in through the planning permit process and a detailed traffic management plan. And you'll see that actually talks to the actual information that's required to be submitted as part of that plan.
Wouldn't it make more sense to have that information before you decide to go ahead and grant a permit?
Through you, Mayor, again, a lot of this information has been discussed, so you'll see what it's saying needs to be in the plan. includes things like priority access that has already been discussed but isn't formalised through the process. It talks about access routes to and from the site. Again, these have all been discussed, and it's been agreed by our infrastructure department that it can operate successfully or in an appropriate manner. Directional signage, again, that's something that you'd expect after an event has a permit to operate, that directional signage be approved in appropriate locations. Warning signage, speed limits, as I say, priority access, keeping access ways free for local residents. So it's really going into the detail that's already been discussed verbally or indicated through the traffic impact assessment submitted.
Councillor Hart.
My understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that if someone comes to this site by car, which you'd expect that there will be quite a few cars, that they can't leave the site during the time of the event, that they can't just come and go. So if that's correct, what happens if there's a code red bushfire warning or some other emergency and people need to leave? How will they evacuate if the cars are all parked there and they're not meant to leave by their cars? How's that going to be handled?
Through you, Mayor, obviously the requirement to stay on site is based on the event operating normally. There will be an emergency management plan every year that will actually dictate, A, whether the event can occur on particular days, code red, extreme, etc., and B, ensure that evacuation takes place safely in the event there is an emergency. And in terms of cars staying on site throughout the event, any emergency situation, obviously, cars could be taken off.
And Council's already satisfied with the emergency management plan, notwithstanding that it doesn't have a traffic management plan that satisfies its requirements. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor, again, with events, the emergency management plans change right up to close to the event and get looked at by police, the CFA, etc. So all of these things would tie in together. We would also require the emergency management plan to be submitted on an annual basis should this event run every year, so that every year the emergency management procedures would get looked at closely by all relevant authorities and council.
So when would Council anticipate having, assuming this is approved today, when would Council anticipating having the emergency management plan that meets its requirements?
Through you, Mayor, the emergency management plan would basically be required well in advance of the event, albeit that, as I say, there'll be opportunity to tweak it. But if you look at condition 34 of the permit, you'll see final copies of all emergency planning documents must be submitted to the CFA not less than 40 days prior to any proposed event.
And the issue of cultural heritage management plan is referred to in the proposed conditions that basically that the applicant needs to comply with those requirements. What independent advice has Council got as to whether a cultural heritage management plan is required? I note you've got advice from a solicitor working for the applicant. In any legal dispute, you have two solicitors on opposite sides arguing different views. So my question is, what independent advice has Council sought as to whether such a plan is required?
Through you, Mayor, I might answer this in a couple of steps. Firstly, the applicant did a due diligence by a suitably qualified archaeologist as part of the application, which indicated that a CHMP was not required. They also then got legal advice, and it would be unusual for legal advice just to be based on an applicant's requirements. Officers also went through VCAT decisions to see how they had treated this matter, and one of the things that should be noted in terms of this site is that it's only a small section in the southwest corner and along the frontage that's actually within an area of cultural heritage sensitivity. The intent is to fence off that area for the duration of the event, including any setup and pack-up times. And VCAT decisions have indicated that that's a satisfactory way of addressing any potential cultural heritage risk by, in effect, making sure the activity area lies entirely outside the area of cultural heritage sensitivity, as would be the case with this event.
So did council get its own legal advice, or did council rely on the legal advice supplied by the applicant?
Council relied on the VCAT decisions and the direction given by tribunal members, and also had regard to the due diligence and the legal advice provided by the applicant.
Okay, Councillor Hart, I might just let you follow up, and then we've got other councillors with questions.
It's a yes/no question, Mayor. So I'll ask it again. I think the answer was no, that council did not get independent legal advice. Is that?
That's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Costin, then Councillor White.
Thank you, Mayor. I've raised a couple of times about mobile phone services. We've all come to rely on our phones, and when events like this happen, if you like, my daughter, who's in her early 20s, you spend more time looking at your phone, sending messages on Instagram and Twitter and whatever than you probably do looking at the bands. And so the phone system is usually overloaded. We even find that down in Apollo Bay during the summer period when there's about 15,000 people down there, and it overloads a system which is supposedly designed for 15,000 people. So everyone will be relying on their phone to contact friends and to receive messages about emergencies. And even the neighbouring properties will be relying on mobile phones to ring the complaints line that's been set up. What has the applicant offered in terms of ensuring that there will be no loss of continuity of mobile phone service? And I'm not talking about radios or anything else, I'm just talking about the phones that we all use, mobile phones.
The advice provided by the applicant is that telephone networks and Wi-Fi would be built into the site to help capacity. So you'd have dedicated networks for the likes of management, production, artists, bar and food vendors and patrons. And then they go on to radios also being available for the emergency services, obviously as part of the proposal as well. And I know the question is largely around general telecoms, but I would flag that neither the police nor the CFA raised any concerns in terms of communication.
So we're almost certain there will be no issues with mobile phones during an emergency. Almost certain. Is that what we're saying?
What I'm saying is basically that the emergency services are satisfied that the event should operate safely. They've raised no concerns in terms of what may occur in an emergency.
Thanks, both.
Councillor White.
Through you, Mayor. A number of objectors, one of their major concerns was about waste and clearing up after the event and how that would occur. And I think built into the permit is something around a bond if not satisfied that it's been cleared up properly. Just wondering who makes that call and how that would work.
I think your microphone's off, Blorhane.
Sorry, apologies. Through you, Mayor. Firstly, it would be expected that the applicant would clear the site, and I know they have had arrangements with organisations, etc. in Lorne, where site clearance was undertaken, and I'm not aware that there have been any particular issues in terms of site clearance following any event in Lorne. If you like, we've built that in as a bit of a safety net. Not saying necessarily we anticipate problems, but should there be evidence, and it would be up to council to determine if the site hadn't been cleared properly, then council would have a bond where it could actually get somebody in to finish the clear up.
I just have one follow-up question. There are also concerns about participants at the festival maybe wandering away and wandering off onto other people's properties, and I believe that fencing requirements are pretty strict. Also around a buffer zone with fencing. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Through you, Mayor, the buffer for fencing largely relates to the area of cultural heritage sensitivity. So in areas, or for fencing close to an area of cultural heritage sensitivity, there'd be a 25-metre buffer between the fence and the area of sensitivity. There is going to be fencing as well on the site, and it will operate as most festivals do, with zones for patrons to be located in, which will be fenced during the event as well. The issue of trespass onto neighbouring properties, I mean, we can't anticipate that should be a major problem. Most people are there actually for the music and the event. Should it occur, it would actually be a police matter if there was trespass onto a neighbouring property.
Sorry, Councillor Costin.
Thanks, Pauline. What assurances do we have in relation to biosecurity, not just for the site itself, but for surrounding properties? Do we have a biosecurity plan? And do we have any assurances or a condition in the permit also in relation to returning the land actually used for the music festival to agricultural production, given that it's all going to be compacted and whatever, trampled and whatever, there would need to be something to be done to return it to agricultural use, I would think, after the festival.
Through you, Mayor, the applicant has indicated that their risk register will include information on biosecurity measures. We're not aware of any potential direct issue that has been raised that is specific to this site. So we're still asking for additional information to be included in the emergency the risk register they're preparing. In terms of the compaction, etc., of soil, obviously this would be in effect a 3 or 4 day event. All structures, etc., would have to be removed from the site afterwards. So in effect, the site would be available for agricultural use, let's say with the setup as well, around 330 days of the year. Certainly our understanding is it would return to agricultural use for those for the rest of the year when the event isn't occurring. The applicant has indicated that if there were things like compaction on the site, they would, with advice from a suitable expert in the field, look to see what measures they needed to take to ensure that the site was suitable for agricultural production.
Thank you.
Councillor Hart. Oh, you've got a follow-up, yep.
Just in relation to that risk register, so there's a number of risks identified, but there is still ongoing work to identify mitigation measures for a number of those risks, is that right?
I think through you, Mayor, with any event, they actually, it's a live document, if you like, that they continually refine. So it's not unusual to actually have things ongoing. They're obviously looking to address the key issues and have discussed those as mentioned in the report. But as I say, the important thing about this is if a permit is issued, it would in effect be a live permit that got looked at annually, should the event run annually, with requirements to update plans based on any previous year's experience, as well as any additional requirements that were identified.
Councillor Bell.
Thanks, Mayor. One of the great opportunities with having an event like this in a shire is what are the opportunities that it gives the community, individuals and community groups to get involved and potentially capitalise on the event to better their own or further their own interests. Are you aware of any community groups in the immediate area that have engaged in formal conversations with the applicant that might demonstrate what benefit they're going to get?
Through you, Mayor, I don't think we can specifically refer to organisations. We do know that Berrigar Football Club attended the meeting when submissions were heard, for example. Our understanding is there may have been other discussions as well, but you know, I wouldn't like to speculate on the organisations.
So thank you for that response. So you're not aware of any formalities or preliminary discussions, at least, that may have been undertaken between community groups and the applicant? You don't have to name anyone specifically.
Through you, Mayor, not specifics, no. The indication is obviously that there will be discussions.
And that all further conversations would happen after a decision is made today, obviously?
Yes, through you, Mayor, obviously it's very hard to actually make arrangements or start discussing arrangements prior to having certainty of an event is going to occur. Similar to things like the shuttle buses as well that they're talking about operating from the site. The discussions on that would take place if a permit is issued for the event rather than prior to the event even being guaranteed to go ahead.
Councillor Hart.
Condition 22 refers to a bond or the possibility of a bond to ensure the site's cleaned up properly in effect, and this issue's been raised by Councillor White. Wouldn't it make more sense to specify the quantum of that bond when you grant the permit? And if so, what would be the appropriate amount of such a bond?
Through you, Mayor, you'll note that the permit condition in question would require 3 quotes to be obtained to the satisfaction of council each year. So that would be from an organisation that would be prepared to go in and actually continue the clearance or finalise the clearance of the site. We'd expect that to potentially differ every year, but the bond would be based on an actual quote that year accepted by council and based on 3 quotes being obtained.
So we don't ask for those quotes, we don't work that out now. We put that on the list to be sorted out once the permit's granted. Is that the way it works?
Through you, Mayor, I suppose what Ms Butler's explaining is that this condition is based on a year-to-year assessment of what the actual cost would be for that clean-up, and if a permit was issued for 5 years today, what the cost of that clean-up would be in 5 years versus what it might be if the event was held at the end of this year would be different, potentially. So the condition's being worded in a way that on an annual basis there's an assessment with independent quotes as to what that cost might be, and we can base a bond request on that.
Through you, Mayor, it's also not best practice to actually specify monetary amounts in permit conditions on planning permits.
Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Mayor. There's a lot of conditions in relation to this permit if it is to be authorised. Some are before, some are during, some are after. For some of the conditions that apply for actions to be done by the applicant before the festival commences, what happens if those aren't met, or one or more of those conditions aren't met prior to the operation of the festival?
Through you, Mayor, they would actually be in breach of their planning permit were they not to for example, provide the required plans, traffic management plan, emergency plan. So there'd be serious issues for the event, obviously, with the CFA and council both advising that they were to operate would be in breach of a planning permit. In effect, they wouldn't have a planning permit for the event unless they complied with the condition.
Are there any further questions from councillors? Councillor Costin.
Thank you. Given that we're looking to issue a permit for, or it's recommended to issue a permit for a certain time frame, but an expectation it might continue beyond that, how are we going to monitor and evaluate the impact or the benefit or the disbenefit or whatever of the event? Is there going to be some independent evaluation, or are we just going to listen to what the event organiser tells us and what the surrounding people tell us, also the objectors, so to speak? Are we doing any independent monitoring and evaluation to determine whether we should continue to offer permits in future years?
Through you, Mayor, if we look at some of the key issues maybe that are of concern currently. So in terms of noise, there's a requirement in the permit to carry out noise readings and then submit them to council. Those would be on an hourly basis during the first running of the event. In terms of traffic, obviously, our infrastructure department and the Department of Transport would both be looking at the management plans and whether that was operating successfully or not. In terms of impact on livestock and other animals, we've put in a condition saying that in year one, the impact, or whether there's an impact or not on animals and livestock, would have to be assessed and monitored. So all of those things would actually build up a proper picture of what the impacts of the event are, rather than, you know, they'd give certainty around all those issues and clarity about whether those issues could be addressed or not, if there were any issues that actually came to light through that process.
And will all that be formalised into some sort of independent report?
Through you, Mayor, there'd be basically a series of things. So, for example, the noise readings would go to our health protection unit for assessment and consideration of whether it was acceptable or not. The animal monitoring, I would expect, would come in separately to us, and we'd have to be assured that that was done by somebody suitably qualified to actually make an assessment of that. Anything infrastructure and traffic related would obviously be going through our infrastructure department and the Department of Transport. So there wouldn't be just one report coming in saying this is how the event ran. Rather, there'd be more detailed information coming in that would go to the relevant sections that have the expertise in those areas to determine whether any potential impacts were acceptable or not.
And through you, Mayor, if I could just add, I suppose for an event of this type, there's a number of organisations that have an input into it beforehand, and I'd expect that there would be some sort of debriefing event afterwards where we would consult with those other agencies and talk about how it did go, what were the learnings, what were the things that could be improved, and that would help to improve then, if it was to be run in subsequent years, how that might happen.
Thank you.
Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Mayor. And just following on from Councillor Costin's question and your answer, Mr McNeil, in relation to a debrief with all the relevant bodies and all the rest of it, I'm looking for a little bit of clarity about how we engage with the community, not necessarily the other agencies, or if the community have some concerns after the concert, how they're addressed. Do they raise it with the people who hold the concert, or will there be an avenue for them to raise their concerns with us?
Through you, Mayor, I think that it would be a good suggestion to have a debrief with residents in the surrounding area after the event, as well as with agencies, and understand how people experienced it. And if there were any issues that people were raising specifically, they'd be directing them to the planning department in the first instance, and we could then refer them off to other parts of council or other agencies for resolution if necessary, but to keep that central information within planning.
Councillor Potter.
Sorry, Mayor. Yeah, just to that point, if a permit is granted, can we get a formal undertaking that officers will do that? As you suggest, have a debrief with the community, not just the agencies.
Through you, Mayor, yes, I can commit that.
Okay, are there any further questions? Okay, if not, then councillors, the officers have provided a recommendation for our consideration. Does any councillor wish to move a motion in relation to this matter? Councillor Potter.
Mayor, I'll move the officers' recommendation as a motion, please.
I'd just like to foreshadow an alternative motion if this one is unsuccessful.
Councillor Potter, which is the recommendation that... Okay, is that up on the screen? That's the officer recommendation. Is that the one you wish to move?
Yes, it is, Mayor.
Not...
Yeah, sorry, there's a...
You've revised it.
A revised officer version, so I apologise, Mayor. I have that in writing. That's the one I wish to move. I thought it was already up, so sorry about that.
What is different? So, just for the people in the gallery's sake, so so they understand what is different. The parts A and B. Oh, B is different to the officer recommendation. You've added in point B.
Yes, I think point B makes an important point, and I thank councillors in general for suggesting that should this be approved, that in the future, if there's any further applications to continue the festival or whatever, it has to come back to a planning committee so that councillors make the decision, not under delegation to officers. So I think that's an important point to stress.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Potter is the mover. Is there a seconder? Councillor White. Is it to be opposed? Councillor Costin. Okay, Councillor Potter is the mover.
Thanks, Mayor, and I thank all the councillors for the questions that we just heard, and officers for their answers. This has been a contentious issue, and it's caused lively debate in the Birregurra community, and a number of people hold quite strong views for and against. And recently we had a submissions hearing, and we heard a lot of those views expressed very, very well by those people who are objecting to this festival going ahead. A lot of those concerns were around traffic flow, the environment, but a lot were around animal welfare and the effect of continual music on their animals, given that it's an important time of the year for some farmers in relation to selling their stock at a store sale about a week later, or only 3 or 4 days later, I think. And also in relation to the movement of their machinery for harvesting between paddock to paddock and farm to farm. I certainly understand those issues, and I know that all councillors have heard them and the officers have heard them as well, as did the applicant. And I was pleased to see in the officers' preparation of the permit conditions that animal welfare and the monitoring of their welfare is now a condition. So That was never around before. It is now, and I thank the officers for including that. And unfortunately, there's no authoritative study in relation to the effect of noise on animals from music festivals. There are some neighbours that from other festivals said there's been no effect, but there's no authority that officers can take us to demonstrate what the effect is, whether it's negative or not. That's a pity, but if this permit is approved after the first year, we'll certainly have an indication as to what the effect of music is on animals, and then that can be considered down the track. So I thank officers again for including that. And I do note anecdotally that Melbourne Zoo have music events, twilight events at Melbourne Zoo over the summer period where they have amplified music, but they certainly don't go till 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning. There's been a lot said about the economic benefit to this festival, and whether it is defined enough or whether it is clear enough. I know anecdotally in Colac, in relation to the Falls Festival, there is a huge surge in business with the supermarkets and with the eating houses from those people who are travelling from the west to go to what was the Falls Festival, buying food, drinks, sometimes clothing, and having a meal at local establishments. And likewise, on the way home, I've seen a lot of these people stop in Colac and have meals and make purchases at supermarkets. So I'm satisfied that there is a broad economic benefit to Colac Otway Shire. We've heard from the proprietor of the Birregurra store. We've heard from president of the Birregurra Football Club, who has a lot of experience with the Falls Festival, and his organisation is looking forward to raising some money through their work with this festival should it go ahead. Council purchased a program called SpendMap, which allows us to track credit card expenditure in the Shire, and if this permit goes ahead after the first festival, we'll certainly, our officers, and Mr Might's very well versed in this, will be able to show us some economic impact to this Shire. And I look forward to seeing that should it go ahead. And I also note that there's $1 a ticket being proposed to be donated to the Birregurra community for a project of their choice. That, say it is $25,000, doesn't get split up amongst the footy club or whatever. That goes to the community in a lump sum to a project of their choice. So that again provides benefit. And you know, it stands to reason that these people attending the festival will be stopping at shops on the way. So I'm satisfied there is an economic benefit. I'm pleased to see an extensive array of conditions should we approve this, 40 or more. I haven't been on council for a long time, but I think that's the most conditions I've ever seen that officers have recommended for an application. So
Time, councillor.
Thanks, Mayor. Rightio. So yes, I urge councillors to consider this. We've got to weigh up the pros and cons, but I'm moving this motion, Mayor.
Councillor White as the seconder.
I'm reserved.
Reserve. Does any other councillor wish to speak? Oh, Councillor Costin, you opposed.
Thank you, Mayor. Excuse me. I struggle with this this event within a farm zone. I don't think it meets the farm zone objectives. it's very similar to the prohibited uses of carnivals, cinema-based entertainment facilities, nightclubs, etc. But just because we package it up under a place of assembly, it seems to be something we can approve. And just because we can approve it doesn't mean we have to approve it. Even the definition of place of assembly includes things like carnivals, cinemas, nightclubs, things which are prohibited in this zone. Music festivals is not specifically listed. It seems it has, the event has the potential to have quite a negative impact on the farming areas around, and no one knows more about that, the impact on those farms than the farmers themselves. And the festival organiser, the musos, people who sit in our planning offices or councillors can never hope to know as much about the farming operations as those farmers do. So to me, the impacts on productive farmland are significant, and in that way it's contrary to the objectives of our farming zone, our natural resource management clauses and the protection of agricultural land. Also, it goes beyond the farm also. I think there's unacceptable detriment to the people who live in the area, to their amenity, just having to have large crowds beside them, to have noise that they didn't invite in, to have difficulty sleeping at night just because they're worried about who might be wandering around. So there's a degree of mental anguish there also, and so it's an incompatible land use. There's some environmental aspects that concern me, such as runoff in a heavy rain event, compaction of the soil, biosecurity, which doesn't seem to be addressed yet, and water management. But I weigh up all those things against, well, what's the benefit? What's the potential benefit? Should we be looking at this event providing a significant benefit to accept those impacts? And to me, and I rely on the economic study because that's what I'm used to doing, and the proponent's own economic consultant tells us that the gross value added is somewhere around $2.5 million. And that's spread between Surf Coast and Colac Otway Shire. So Colac Otway Shire gets somewhat less than 2.5 million. And that's gross value added. And that takes into account extra spending in shops, people buying pizzas, everything else. That comes into the economic study. So that's what is the benefit. You compare that to the gross regional product of Colac Otway Shire, and I'm not sure of the exact figures because I've had two different ones, but it's somewhere between 1.5 billion and 3.5 billion. 1.5 to 3 billion. And all this event adds to this is some fraction of 2.5 million.
Time, councillor.
It doesn't seem enough to me. So for those reasons, I can't support this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any other councillor wish to speak? I don't know, Councillor Hart, I think was first. Just.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I would like to move an amendment that the permit be for 1 year, and I understand that the councillors have a sheet in front of them which show them various conditions which would be changed so that the permit's only 1 year rather than 2.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hart. Yes, councillors do have that in front of them. Councillor Hart, then you've moved that amendment. Is there a seconder for that amendment? No, that amendment has lapsed. So, Councillor Hart, do you wish to speak to the item?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I think we have to go back to the beginning on this. This site is in a farm zone, and that's meant to give priority to farming, and it's obviously a farming area. We've had a lot of talk about other sites where this has been, similar events been held. The one at Lawns in a rural conservation zone, and it's largely surrounded by forest. This particular site is surrounded by operating farms. The fact that a permit can be granted doesn't mean that we must grant a permit. And when you look at this particular application, we see a list of gaps And I think some of the most important ones, and it's been touched on, is the adverse effect on livestock from the event. And the farming community is left in the situation where they're expected to virtually be the test or the experiment to see whether or not it does affect them because of a lack of studies. In one sense, you can imagine why there are a lack of studies, because the people who would have the funding to do those is actually suited by the way this agenda has been prepared that there isn't that information. So what I was proposing was, if the term of this permit was amended to 1 year, then we could see exactly what the effects are. We would have the evidence, and if it all went very smoothly, as has been suggested by the officer's report and the applicant in effect, then we'd know. After 1 year, you would know, rather than just giving the 2 years that the council is proposing. Unfortunately, the farming community that's closest to this, and that should be our priority and our greatest concern, will be bearing the greatest cost if it doesn't work out. Once you grant the permit, there's nothing of substance that can be done for 2 years. There's nothing in this that details how this compensation arrangement will be managed. It's something that's been talked about, but council has no role and no commitment in relation to that. I really think it's unfortunate that the community who are being affected most are going to be abandoned virtually by this permit. When you have a permit, when you're trying to manage this situation by so many conditions, and that was referred to by the mover, that's really telling you that this event should not be in that site. A long, long list of conditions, trying to plug the gaps, trying to deal with all the adverse effects. The message from that, when you've got to that stage with so many unanswered questions and so many items to be taken on faith, that the effect on livestock won't happen. Oh, if it does, sorry about that. Where is the consideration of the negative costs
Time, Councillor.
and the people affected? Either the permit should be shortened to a year, or alternatively it should be rejected completely.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mayor. Firstly, I'd just like to start by thanking everyone for being in attendance today. It's been a pretty lengthy, if not drawn-out process, which culminates today. And for me, as the only councillor who lives in the near vicinity of the proposed event, it's been a lot of balancing in my head over a long period of time now. So it's been a really difficult decision, or will be a difficult decision for me to make. During the process, we've heard lots of information. And as that process has drawn on, additional information has come to hand, to the point where I conclude with some of the issues that I've identified that haven't necessarily been addressed to date. We've heard a little bit about cultural heritage sensitivities and also environmental sensitivities given the proposed location. While there have been some conditions that have been applied in the recommended motion, I'm not convinced, and I don't fully accept that the information that has been provided to date is adequate on either. With such sensitivities around cultural heritage, I believe the process has been followed to a minimum undertaking, and with my experiences in such situations, the advice would always be to go above and beyond the requirements, both from a cultural heritage standpoint and also environmental standpoint. Councillor Costin and Councillor Hart have touched on the suitability of the land use, given that it's in the farming zone. And I accept that the proposed event is a permissible use under the information that has been provided to us by the council. However, I do share strong concerns around the definitions with the words that are outlined in the planning scheme that eventually bring to that conclusion. I don't know. In fact, I'm convinced that the intention of the farming zone for that piece of land did not consider having 20 to 35,000 people on that location. The other concern that I have with the next few points is around the limited information that we have and the anecdotal evidence that has supported an argument either way. And I think the anecdotal evidence or the lack of information that is being used is enough to determine that there isn't grounds to grant a permit in this particular case. The impact on animals, as we've discussed, is actually profound. Now, again, we haven't been able to demonstrate any technical support either way, and yet a decision has been made to recommend a permit here. I can tell you with my own observations as a farmer and with other people in the district, yes, anecdotally, that the noise from music operations or events do have a strong and negative impact on cattle. Last New Year's Eve, in the same vicinity, there was a party, albeit with much fewer people, in the Bowen Downs district, of about 150 people in attendance. The impact to cattle in the immediate area was profound. Beg your pardon?
Time.
Can I just finish up? I can only imagine what 20 to 30,000 people might do with the impact on these animals. Finally, you weigh up these negatives as opposed to the potential benefit from the community. And as I've already discussed, I don't believe that there's been, on balance, a good enough demonstration to community as a result of granting a permit in this location. From my observations, both as a councillor, as a landowner, albeit an objective one in the immediate area, I cannot see enough information or enough evidence to suggest that a planning permit should be granted in this case, and I won't be supporting it.
Does any other councillor wish to speak? No? Well, I'll just make some comments before Councillor White, who reserved, and Councillor Potter has a right of reply. So during the process, a number of objections have been made from people across the Shire, people who live in close proximity to the site and people who live further away. And I'll just note that for a long time this site had a permit as a backup to the Falls Festival, which it was never used, but and the permit actually lapsed. So there's some history with the site and the Falls Festival. The officers have assessed the application and with conditions have recommended a 2-year permit. Some of the objections raised by people, by neighbours and people who live further away from the area have been around noise, traffic, impact on livestock, waste and security, which is a really big concern, and general amenity, and in particular the ability of farmers to be able to operate their businesses. It has been highlighted that it's a busy time of year around that area due to the Birregurrawina sale, which is early January, and particularly haymaking, and particularly haymaking for people who live around Telegraph Road and Wire Lane. There have been a number of submissions received in support of the application, and they range from endorsement for the Falls Festival in its previous location and economic benefit, and endorsement for the operators. We've also heard about the opportunities for business and opportunities for local sporting groups and volunteer organisations to raise funds. The application is in a farming zone and is a permissible event in the zone, but the primary purpose, of course, for the zone is to support agriculture. But the farming zone just doesn't mean that it's specifically reserved for farming. There's a lot of different types of uses that the farming zone can be used for. And I know in the area that I live in, which is a farming zone, within sort of 10 kilometres of where I live, within the zone I've got a quarry, a renewable energy project, a commercial bakery. I even have an airfield near me, which would be some sort of special zoning, but still within the farming area. So a lot of different things happen around the large farming area that I live in, and all those projects actually, interestingly enough, raised a lot of concerns before they went ahead. In making a decision today, I've had to very seriously consider the ability of the local farming community to operate their businesses. And will the measures proposed by the applicant be enough for agriculture to operate during the days of the festival? And I guess initially, they've put in an application for a 5-year permit. I think that with good management and communication with neighbours at the event and the farming can coexist for the 4 days of the event and the bump in and bump out. I think a 2-year permit gives some certainty to the operator and some certainty to neighbours that the event organisers remain focused on ensuring agriculture can continue for the days of the festival. Security of property is also a significant concern of neighbours, and I think this can be addressed by the applicant and needs to be addressed. There's an opportunity for the wider community, and I think as a councillor, you're always thinking of that broad cross-section of the community. And I think there is an opportunity for us to continue to benefit, because we've benefited over the years, I think, from the current festival, where its current site is, through tourism and economic activity. And for these reasons, I'll be supporting a 2-year permit. Councillor White, you had a right of reply.
Thank you, Kate. I think you've covered off on a lot of the things I was going to talk about. But firstly, I want to acknowledge the community and the conversations that have been going on over the last 6 months. It's been a really significant debate and a significant issue for the community to get their heads around. And I think the objectors and supporters that presented to us did so in a really respectful and good manner, and I really want to acknowledge that. For me, it's also been a real challenging one to get my head around, and it's a very complex event to put on, and I want to acknowledge the huge amount of work that our team have done to provide us with as much information as they possibly could in giving us opportunity to make some informed decisions around what we want for our community. I think one of the things I took from it was that the event organisers are very, very experienced, and they've been running these events for 20 years plus, I think, and along the way they would have learnt and changed their practices, and I think the traffic management one was probably a good example of that. In reading all the information, I was absolutely blown away by the amount of reports that need to be provided and the amount of work that needs to be done to ensure that the conditions are met. I think one of the councillors said, there are 40 conditions and that must raise concerns. For me, 40 conditions says this has been thoroughly and completely researched, and the conditions are there to reassure us that this event is going to be given every opportunity to succeed. I do want to acknowledge the animal welfare issues, and as we've heard, there's no evidence either way to say what the impact is going to be, but I do feel reassured that animal monitoring has been included in the permit, and that there will be follow-up to assess the impact on the animals. There has been discussion of compensation, and I know that hasn't been built into the permit, but I believe that is a genuine offer, and the details of that will follow on. And I think, although it's not part of a planning department's role, I'm sure that there is commitment to ensure that all these things are properly followed up once at the conclusion of the event. I think the economic benefit is another debate that is really difficult to have, but 5 million to our general community may not sound much to some councillors, but to me that sounds like quite a benefit, and I'm sure the businesses and people that will benefit would agree that that will be significant for them. And I think $25,000 for the community of Birregurra to do a project is also worth considering. We're considering a 2-year permit. There was some discussion about a 1-year permit. I think 2 years is a really reasonable and sensible way to go, because it gives us opportunity to properly evaluate, and we've heard today what an evaluation might look like and how all the different elements of that evaluation will be pulled together and how it will be reported back. And I think that also gives opportunity to the applicant, at least certainty of 2 years, to build on what they've done, learn from any adverse impacts and rectify and mitigate any risks into the future. I think it's really important for an undertaking such as this, to this extent, to have the certainty of at least 2 years, because it's a very big investment.
Time, Councillor.
In the end, I think for our community, for our region, I think it's a really exciting event, and I think it's something that maybe we can build on in our various little communities and really make it something to showcase our region. And it's quite an iconic event for the whole of Australia. So I really want to give opportunity for 2 years and support the permit.
Councillor Potter, you had a right of reply.
Yes, thanks, Mayor. Just a couple of points, and Councillor White did touch on them, but just in relation to the number of conditions in the officer's recommendation, they're in response to concerns raised. The people who raised concerns haven't been abandoned; they've been listened to, and their concerns have been incorporated into conditions inserted by Council to make the applicant, if he wants to run this festival, complying with those conditions which address some of the concerns by the community. And we're still feeling the effects of COVID still hanging around, and any injection of extra money into this community is a good thing for business. I just want to mention our economic development strategy that Council's adopted. Attracting festivals was one of the strategies that we endorsed in order to generate economic activity. We didn't have to attract this one, but it's came to us. But we'd be working against our own strategy if we didn't support giving this festival a go. In fact, we allocated some money to spend to attract events, which we haven't had to spend on this one. So this forms part of a councillor-adopted strategy. And lastly, people have been locked up for a couple of years. The social and mental impacts of that have been significant. Artists have been on the breadline. Young people have been confined to their rooms. This provides finally a significant way in which people can let their hair down, so to speak, but go and enjoy themselves, and that artists can make some money, and those people employed in the entertainment industry can earn an income.
Thank you, councillors. I will now call for a vote. All those in favour? All those against? The item's carried 4-3. Division is called. All those in favour? Councillor Potter, Councillor McCracken, Councillor White, Councillor Hanson. All those against? Councillor Hart, Councillor Costin, Councillor Bell. Thank you, councillors. That concludes this unscheduled planning committee meeting of the Colac Otway Shire. I declare this meeting closed. Thank you.